Hello, and welcome to Curated Classics, the channel that shares the most famous and popular stories from books, films, and history in quick summaries, so that you can learn the classics quickly without hours of reading or years of expensive courses. Today, you are listening to the summary of A Room with a View by E.M. Forster, which is a novel set in the early 20th century that tells the story of a young woman named Lucy Honeychurch. Lucy is a sheltered and proper young Englishwoman who is on holiday in Italy with her older cousin, Charlotte Bartlett. While staying in a pension in Florence, Lucy meets a young man named George Emerson, who is staying with his father. Lucy and George are drawn to each other, but their romance is complicated by the social conventions of the time and by the meddling of Charlotte, who is concerned about Lucy's reputation. When Lucy returns to England, she becomes engaged to a wealthy and respectable man named Cecil Vyse, but she finds that she cannot stop thinking about George. As the story unfolds, Lucy is forced to confront her true feelings and make a difficult choice between the expectations of society and her own desires. The novel explores themes of love, class, and the conflict between individual freedom and societal expectations. Through Lucy's journey, Forster challenges the rigid social norms of Edwardian England and celebrates the transformative power of personal relationships and experiences. For a more in-depth understanding of the book, we will now provide a chapter-by-chapter breakdown. Chapter 1 introduces the main character, Lucy Honeychurch, and her chaperone, Charlotte Bartlett. They're both staying at the Pension Bertolini, a pension in Florence, Italy. The chapter begins with the two women discussing their room, which does not have a view. They express disappointment and dissatisfaction with the room and its furnishings. While they are talking, another guest, Mr. Emerson, interrupts them to offer them his own room, which has a view. Charlotte is hesitant, but Lucy is intrigued by Mr. Emerson's offer and persuades Charlotte to accept it. After they move to their new room, Lucy and Charlotte explore the city. Visiting landmarks such as the Duomo and the Ponte Vecchio, they encounter two other guests from the pension, a clergyman and his wife, who disapprove of Lucy and Charlotte's independent exploration of the city. The group ends up in a church, where they witness a heated argument between two Italian men. The chapter ends with Lucy and Charlotte returning to the pension and Lucy reflecting on the day's events. She feels a sense of excitement and anticipation for what is to come, both in her travels and in her life. Chapter 2 introduces the other guests staying at the Pension Bertolini, including the wealthy and snobbish Miss Lavish, who is a writer, and the flamboyant Mr. Emerson and his son George. Charlotte is suspicious of the Emersons and warns Lucy to avoid them, but Lucy is intrigued by their unconventional and open personalities. In Chapter 3, Lucy and Charlotte are invited to a group outing to the countryside. They are joined by the Emersons, Miss Lavish, and others. While in the countryside, George Emerson kisses Lucy in a field of violets, but she quickly runs away. This incident creates tension between Lucy and George and sets up the central conflict of the novel. Chapter 4 sees Lucy and Charlotte departing from Florence and traveling to Rome. They encounter Miss Lavish once again, and she takes them on a tour of the city. During their tour, they witness a stabbing and are saved by the quick actions of Mr. Emerson and his son, George. Lucy is grateful for their help and begins to see them in a new light. In Chapter 5, Lucy and Charlotte visit the Church of Santa Croce. While inside, Lucy has a realization about her true feelings for George Emerson, but she keeps them hidden from everyone, including herself. They encounter the Emersons once again, and George asks Lucy to play Beethoven on the piano. She agrees, but her playing is interrupted by Charlotte, who disapproves of the scene and takes Lucy away. Chapter 6 Lucy returns to the pension feeling confused and conflicted. She is engaged to Cecil Vyse, a wealthy and proper gentleman, but her feelings for George Emerson continue to grow. She confides in Miss Lavish, who encourages her to follow her heart. In Chapter 7, Lucy and Cecil visit the country estate of the Honeychurch family. Lucy meets the Reverend Mr. Beebe and his mother, who is staying nearby. Mr. Beebe and Lucy have a conversation about the beauty of nature, which reinforces Lucy's conflicted feelings about her engagement. In Chapter 8, Lucy and Cecil visit the Emersons in London, where Lucy becomes disillusioned with his pretentiousness. She sees the contrast between the Emersons' free and unconventional way of living and Cecil's rigid adherence to social conventions. She becomes increasingly aware of the gulf between her feelings for George and her expectations for her future. In Chapter 9, Lucy is reunited with George, who is now living in London. They share a passionate kiss, but Lucy ultimately decides to remain engaged to Cecil. She is torn between her love for George and her sense of duty to her family and society. In Chapter 10, the Honeychurches travel to a resort in Italy, where Lucy is once again reunited with George. She finds it increasingly difficult to resist her feelings for him, but she is torn between her desire for personal fulfillment and her obligation to conform to social expectations. The chapter ends with Lucy feeling increasingly conflicted and uncertain about her future. Chapter 11, Lucy and Miss Bartlett venture out for a walk in Florence with Mr. Emerson. Along the way, they encounter Mr. Eager, who pontificates about the superiority of the Anglican Church. They visit the Uffizi Gallery, where Lucy is entranced by the art, and they meet Cecil Vyse, who has just returned from Rome. Cecil expressed disdain for Italian culture, while Lucy began to feel increasingly uncomfortable with his behavior. The chapter establishes the contrasts between the attitudes towards Italy and the value of emotion that will continue to be explored in the novel. In Chapter 12, Lucy and Miss Bartlett arrive in Rome and encounter the Emersons, who invite them on a drive through the countryside. Lucy is struck by the beauty of the landscape and overhears Mr. Emerson speaking to his son about the value of emotion and instinct, which resonates with her. Later, Lucy is conflicted about her growing attraction to George Emerson and her obligation to marry Cecil Vyse, who has also arrived in Rome. The chapter sets up the central conflict of the novel, which is Lucy's struggle to reconcile her own desires with the expectations and conventions of society. In Chapter 13, Lucy and George share a kiss in the woods, witnessed by Cecil. This event marks a turning point in the novel, as Lucy realizes that she cannot continue to live a life that is not true to her own desires. Chapter 14 sees the Honeychurches returning to England, with Lucy still engaged to Cecil. She is increasingly aware of the gulf between her feelings for George and her obligation to fulfill her social duties. In Chapter 15, Lucy and Cecil attend a concert where they encounter the Emersons once again. George reveals that he is planning to move to Greece, and Lucy is torn between her love for him and her sense of duty. In Chapter 16, Lucy breaks off her engagement with Cecil after he insults her family and their way of life. She realizes that she cannot continue to live a life that is not true to her own desires. In Chapter 17, Lucy travels to Greece with the Emersons, where she finally admits her love for George. They become engaged, but their happiness is threatened by the disapproval of their families. Chapter 18 sees Lucy and George returning to Florence, where they encounter the same group of people from the beginning of the novel. They are now able to interact freely and openly, without the constraints of social expectations. In Chapter 19, Lucy and George reunite with Mr. Beebe, who encourages them to pursue their love despite the disapproval of society. He suggests that they move to London, where they will be free to live their lives as they wish. Chapter 20 sees Lucy and George looking to their future with hope and anticipation. The novel ends with their future left open-ended, but with the possibility of a happy life together. Overall, these chapters explore the themes of individual freedom, personal fulfillment, and the transformative power of personal relationships. The novel challenges the rigid norms of Edwardian England and celebrates the importance of pursuing one's desires and passions, even in the face of social pressure and convention. It emphasizes the transformative power of personal relationships and experiences, and the possibility of finding happiness and fulfillment by following one's heart. Thanks for listening to Curated Classics. If you enjoyed this story and it provided valuable insights, We hope you will give this video a like by clicking the thumbs up and sharing it with other lifelong learners. And please check out more of the greatest stories throughout history on the Curated Classics channel. See you next time.